Today we're looking at a shot from Quentin Tarantino's The Hateful Eight, which was shot on 70mm Kodak film, and comparing it to a DIY version that we created shooting with an iPhone. Before we get into it, just want to make clear that I'm not saying Hollywood should be using an iPhone in their movies. No, I'm saying that if you want to, you can. It's also just a fun experiment to see what we can do. And today, of course, you can do a lot with a phone or any affordable camera, really. And as a matter of fact, we also did a version of this shot with my Blackmagic Pocket Cinema 4K camera, which I'll show later in the video. So this original was shot by famed cinematographer Robert Richardson, who is a great DP and really known for using very bright backlight and or top-down lighting. It's a very stylized look, but it lends itself to the stylized type movies he often works on, like JFK, Kill Bill, or here, The Hateful Eight. So you've got two top-down tungsten lights shining onto the table, and then a heavy backlight that's a bit bluer behind John Ruth, who's played by Kurt Russell. The light on his face is bouncing from the table, and there's possibly a bounce card or board in front of him, which is what we use in our shot that I'll show in just a minute. And by the way, in our recreation version, we didn't include the Jennifer Jason Leigh character, nor did we shoot in a real cabin, this being a DIY project. And spoiler alert, we pick it up after he's poisoned by the coffee. Our main focus here is recreating the lighting, the character's look, and then finishing it all out in post-production with color grading and using FilmConvert. To do this shot, we went to a studio, which as a side note, I used to work out of before the pandemic. So if you've seen any of my videos from a few years ago, you might recognize it. But you could do the shot in a large room of your house or wherever, really. A studio is not required. I just wanted some extra space due to the large background we used. And by the way, we're on a green screen stage here, only because it was the only one available. We didn't actually do any green screen shots. So the first thing we did was set up that big background. And this is just a photo backdrop that's going to be darkly lit behind the actor and approximate like he's sitting in a cabin. This is my low budget DIY approach. So we're hanging the backdrop with just some basic stands and a bar going across and some spring clamps, which I already owned, but the backdrop itself cost about $40. We also used a photo backdrop on the table. The table is just a regular conference style table, but the backdrop looks like wood paneling to help match the shot in the movie. This is the kind of stuff you can make work with movie magic. Think concrete walls or bricks in a movie that are actually foam.
Oh yeah!
Whoa! The backdrop was $16. Next, we started working on the lighting. We put a backlight behind the background and then two spot style lights over the table. And I'm using two different lights here because that's what I had. One smaller aperture on a C-stand and a larger Fresnel from Falcon Eyes we put on a combo stand as it's a heavier light. I'll talk more about the lighting in just a moment, but now we'll look at how we created our version of the John Ruth character.
I'm getting ready to build a mustache.
This is Steve Elkins, and he's an actor who's been in a lot of my iPhone shot short films. But he also used to do effects makeup, which helped a lot on this DIY job.
This hair comes braided like this. I bought this from a effects makeup supply store in Dallas. It's called crepe hair. And I took a steamer and I had to steam it out and pull it, and I kind of have to style it and trim it out. Got about half of the mustache applied, although I'm going to do a little bit more here in the center section once we get to the end of things. The lion's share of the mustache is complete. Obviously, I got to let this spirit gum set up. I'm going to make some adjustments. I'll probably trim, maybe even do a little bit of combing on it just to try to pull some of that stuff out. And here we are.
Steve also put together the wardrobe, which he compiled through various thrift store purchases. Total cost for makeup and wardrobe was just under $80. So here's the real shot we're recreating from the movie Hateful Eight. And here's our version so far on the iPhone. To get this look, we turned off all the studio lights, the overhead lights, and now we're just using ours. And I mentioned earlier, Robert Richardson probably used a bounce card, and that's what we're doing here too. So the light bounces off the table into the actor's face, but then also off the whiteboard. The two spotlights are creating the warmer tungsten pools of light on the table, and both these lights can be focused or spotted, but on the larger light on the right, we made a snoot out of black wrap to make it even a tighter spot. And speaking of the table, now that everything is darker, it's looking pretty good. I also put a couple small tube lights on the ground behind Steve to add just a little bit of light on the background. And then behind the background, we have that large backlight that is hitting him and creating that nice bluer rim light. And we spared no expense here to have our John Ruth sit in a plastic chair, which is obviously part of every 19th century cabin. And now, we're ready to shoot. Action. First shot here, I'm using the iPhone 14 Pro Max, shooting 4K 24 frames per second, ProRes HQ with Filmic Pro Log V3 Plus. And here's how that looked right out of the camera. And then here is the finished shot with color grading and VFX. Well, it looks pretty darn good, and I was especially impressed with how well the iPhone did in low light. We'll get into what I did in post-production in just a second, but I also shot a close-up using the Cinema P3 camera app in ProRes HQ Log, and to do that we used the new 2x tele on the 14 Pro Max and its 48 megapixel sensor, which by the way might be one of my favorite new features of this new phone. In the actual movie, the shot goes from a wide to a tight, so we mimic that. And here's what that looked like right out of the camera. And then the final color graded shot. And I also did one shot in cinematic mode. Cinematic mode needs a lot of light, so I was hesitant to do it, but I gave it a try. And with the iPhone 14, it's definitely been improved, shooting 4K and 24 frames per second. And the cutout is better too. I really like having the shallow depth of field in this kind of shot especially. Knocking that background out of focus here is really important to make it look more realistic. And so here's right out of the camera. And then here's graded with visual effects. And for the heck of it, because why not, we shot it with my Blackmagic Pocket Cinema 4K. We left everything the same with the lighting, and I shot a wide and a tight using Blackmagic RAW. For the wide, I used a 16mm Rokinon F2 Cine Prime with a Metabones adapter, and then for the tight, I used my Sigma 18-35 f1.8. And I thought these shots turned out really great. The dynamic range of the Blackmagic RAW held up well, and the shallower depth of field looks nice here too. Overall, pretty happy with both these shots. And now on to post-production, which was super important with this job. Matching these kind of shots can really be tricky. To do this, I used Adobe Premiere Pro, but you could use Final Cut Pro, DaVinci Resolve, whatever you prefer. Although this would be kind of tough to do in LumaFusion, primarily because of all the masking I did. And you can't use FilmConvert in that app. For the Filmic Pro Log V3 Plus version, I first added my D-Log LUT, then I had to do a set extension for the background. In a perfect world, I would have had a larger background that covered the entire frame, but here I didn't. So I shot a background plate that I then cropped and duplicated the right edge and used mask to blend the sides together. Then I did color correction, and since I was trying to match the look from the movie, I used that shot as a reference. To get the colors and the look close, I had to use lots of what are called power windows, or also masks. I used them on the background to darken it and add some blue. I used them on the table to warm up the spotlights. I used some to make the pools of light more defined, along with adding a vignette. I added a mask around the backlight to make it less blue. I had to mask around his hand in the cup when he threw it since it went off the background. And I even added a mask around Steve to blur out the background, giving it a more shallow depth of field look. Since I shot on the wide lens on the iPhone, everything was in focus. What about the blood? Well, in the actual movie, Kurt Russell spewed fake blood everywhere, but I didn't want to mess with fake blood, so I added it in post-production. This is just a blood spatter effect with an alpha channel so I could key it. And then I added a 3D effect to it and played with the blending modes to make it look like it was actually on the table. While it doesn't look the same as in the movie, I think it works, especially for this DIY project. And now the final touch to tie it all together, I used FilmConvert. The Hateful Eight was shot on Kodak 5207 film stock, so the great thing about FilmConvert is you can select that exact stock and apply it to digitally shot footage. Then choose your camera make, model, and profile. Here I chose the iPhone 13 Pro as the 14 Pro pack is not available yet. Adjust the color temperature and finesse the film look and film print look to taste. And then for film size, I chose 35mm, which relates to the grain structure. And then I just adjusted those controls to my liking. And adding a bit more grain here I thought worked pretty nice for this look. And then if needed, you can play with the color correction tools and more, all within the plugin. The before and after using FilmConvert really is a pretty big difference and makes this shot pop, and helps it match nicely to the original. I did pretty much the same workflow on each of the iPhone shots and also my Blackmagic camera, although they differed a little bit because of the different camera profiles. Total out-of-pocket spent was under $200, including lunch for the crew, and the whole thing took about 3 or so hours to shoot. Now yeah, I own all that gear already, and I had access to the studio, but again, you could do something similar in your living room using small affordable LED lights and of course, your phone. After doing this job, I'm more convinced than ever before that if you want to make a movie with your iPhone, you can do it. The quality is there. Of course, if you want to use a different camera like Blackmagic or whatever, that's fine too. So there's really just no excuses today. If you want to make a movie, get out there and do it. Thank you for watching, and thank you to FilmConvert for sponsoring this episode. There's a link in the description that'll save you 10% if you're interested. Now again, get out there and make your own movie. Don't wait to create.